everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Not So Wide Divide. Today we have Mr. Brad Doyle with us. Mr. Brad has been an avid listener and reached out to us and said, "Hey guys, I want to talk about some topics. I want to hear y'all opinion on some things." So we were like, "Hey, you want to come on and break it down for us?" And he was like, "Absolutely." So we welcome you. Thank you for the comments. Thanks for the listening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Give us a little 30 seconds about you.
Sure thing. Like he said, my name is Brad Doyle. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, but I tell people I was raised in southern Louisiana. I moved to New Orleans when I was a sophomore in high school. Attended Jesuit High School in New Orleans. Then from Jesuit, I went to Tulane for free because my mom worked there, which was nice. But unfortunately, in the middle of my college career, my sophomore year, she moved out to California with my dad. So I couldn't attend Tulane for free anymore, so I had to go to LSU, where it was a little cheaper, use my TOPS money and things like that. So I finished out my mathematics degree from LSU with a concentration in abstract math. And then I went straight into the workforce. I worked for a computer company out of New Orleans. I decided the IT industry wasn't really for me, and I'd always had a dream about being an educator, so I went back to school at Tulane, where I had started an education program. I just didn't get to finish my education program at Tulane, and became a certified educator. And I've been teaching 6th, 7th, and now all levels of high school math for about 3 years now.
Jeez.
And been working with Cody on the wrestling team at Terrebonne Parish as an assistant coach.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your service, because that's, teachers, in my opinion, are just as important, if not more important, than any other service providers that we have in this industry.
Or in this room.
Absolutely in this room. Ain't no doubt. But
I'm a service provider, too. So.
But
it's all good work, man.
Brad kind of wrote in some topics, and it's all educator related. We'll talk about some school choice. He mentioned school to prison pipeline, which is very interesting, and that's why I wanted you to stay here. Because
5 minutes, man.
I get you, but we'll hit that one first.
Yep,
we'll hit that one first. And some other things will kind of go down. So, Brad, if you can explain when you wrote that topic in school to prison pipeline, I thought it was very interesting, and I did a little research, and I was like, you know what, that's why I wanted you to stay. So,
sure, absolutely. So again, I'm definitely not an expert on any of these topics, but I can give you a little excerpt, and we can talk about it for sure. So when we talk about school to prison pipeline, we're talking about a criticism, especially down here in New Orleans, that charter schools get for doing exactly what it says, right? You're getting children ready for prison instead of the workforce or being successful in society. Now, most of the criticism comes from kind of harsh discipline in terms of they're very strict, right? You break one rule, you're done. You get in trouble, you may get some sort of expulsion. And with that comes, these high expulsion rates for black and brown children, things like that. But also basic rules within the schools. For example, when you're walking in the hallways, you have to walk down painted lines on the side of the hallways and stuff like that. And where else do you do that in the world? You do that in prison, right? It's a very strict, very regimented educational program, which essentially they get this criticism that you're not really gearing kids to go to work. I mean, there's no painted lines at the workplace, right? You're given all these sorts of freedom, but when you're at school, you're just monitored every second of the day and kind of essentially waiting for you to mess up, right? And then basically just comes from the high statistics or high number of children that are exiting schools or being sent directly from school to juvenile programs or becoming adults and just going right into prison right out of school. It's a crazy thing to talk about, that's for sure. Definitely not an expert, but where I went to school, I had the privilege of going to a bunch of really good public schools in Louisville, Kentucky, before moving down here and then eventually going to private school. I never saw a cop in a workplace. And now every school that I've been to, there's been cops inside of schools. And it just kind of blows my mind every day. Now that I've been in Terrebonne Parish and teaching at Terrebonne High School, I kind of get it. There are some actions going on that definitely need to be handled by police, but it's just crazy, just even the imagery that you get of seeing these police on campus and that sort of thing. But that's kind of the main idea, just this big criticism that schools are not preparing children for the workplace. It's just really preparing them to follow rules and get ready to go to prison, essentially, after high school. Or
pretty much stay in check.
Yeah. Well, I'll add one thing to something that I was reading that because we don't have a lot of the painted, at least when I was in school, the institutionalization of schools, right? But what we did have, and it's not so much now after talking with Cody since we did this podcast, is zero tolerance, right?
Yeah.
Zero tolerance is a huge benefactor to the school to prison pipeline, because it creates these rap sheets, if you will, for these students that don't deserve it. It was
See, people often confuse zero tolerance as being a law enforcement policy. It's not. Zero tolerance is a school board policy. Zero tolerance was put in place while we were actually in school. And look, on the surface, it's been effective in our time at reducing fights, because we went from, there was a fight almost every day at recess to, if you got one or two a year, that was a big deal. Here recently,
Is zero tolerance still a thing in our area?
It is. However, the problem with having zero tolerance for anything, when you implement a zero tolerance program, you implement a zero discretion policy, and that's where the problems come in. I've always handled any kind of fight at school the same way that I would handle it on the street, and I've also handled it the way I'd want it handled if my children were involved in it. I have never, and will I ever, take a child to jail for defending themselves. And that's one of the knocks that zero tolerance gets, is that if my kids defend themselves, they go to jail, and that's not the case. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it shouldn't. It shouldn't, and if it's handled properly, it won't. Now you do get some push from administrations to bring those kids in, regardless. But that's where as a law enforcement officer, you have to understand that ultimate decision lies on you. It doesn't lie on the staff.
But given in that context, right? Do you think that, being that it's a school board policy, I don't know how wide of a policy this is, like you said, in your area. Like, they didn't have cops in schools, right?
Right.
Like,
Well, we don't have cops in private schools here either.
yeah, but he said when he was in Kentucky.
Right, when I was in Kentucky.
The public
Well,
school section, they didn't
again,
have.
But he transferred, what, 7th grade, you said?
It's my sophomore year. high
Sophomore
school.
year, okay. But, I'm sure most of the high schools had.
That could be
Law
true.
enforcement.
I only attended high school 1 year in Kentucky, and then I went to Jesuit, which is a private school. So that may be the case, and it may have just been I'd never seen it, But at the same time, imagery can be everything. I've had so many people, especially now that we've had 3 SROs at Terrebonne almost daily now. They're like, "What's going on at Terrebonne? Why are there so many cops out there?" Just because they see 3 cops outside, and that doesn't portray a good image for anybody, But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like I said, I never saw a cop in high school, but now every school that I've been in, I just have seen metal detectors, cops, wands, waving everything.
But that's the reason for that. The push for it started after Columbine High School, okay, with active shooters starting to become a thing. A school with a law enforcement officer at it is a harder target than a school without one.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would ever debate or disagree with having them, there. I think the imagery idea behind it is, it's kind of like the TSA guys on the airplane. You don't know which one they are.
Well, but
if
you want your SRO to be highly visible, and that's for a reason. It's to deter things.
But 3?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
We'll get into that.
Is that common, or
No,
is it
no,
just
no, no,
okay?
no,
So
that's
that's
very
individualized.
recent, yeah.
That's fine. And that's why I was just going with
Right.
it. I just wanted to make sure that it's not something that.
But that's why it's also important to pick the proper officer to put into a school, right? Because that makes a huge difference. If you go back and look at Terrebonne's, and I'll just use that as an example because I worked there. Okay?
And you went to school there,
I
and
went
you
to school
got good
there,
history
right.
there.
If you go back and look at the years that I was at Terrebonne, and their Facebook page, just for instance, you're going to see me painting kids' faces during anti-bullying month. You're going to see me getting recognized as inspirational teacher. You're going to see me being involved in the school in a positive way because that's part of your roles as a resource officer. It's not just to enforce laws; it's to bridge that gap between.
It's to embed yourself
Right,
in that community.
Right. But you're an ambassador for
Yeah.
law enforcement, and to show that I'm here to help, I'm not here to hurt. To show that I am approachable, that you can come talk to me. I'm a human, just like you are. So I'm a huge proponent for you have to be very, very selective of the cops that you put into the schools.
And what Tori's talked about in a lot of our podcasts is to build that community between the
Absolutely.
police and the people
Absolutely.
that
Yes,
hate the
yes.
police or were raised,
You gotta bridge
So
that gap.
it's not really hate the police, man. It's just when you see the obvious.
it's a distrust, right?
Yeah, it's more
Distrust
of a
of the
distrust
institution,
issue.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing like with the school system, like what he's saying. The zero tolerance policy at the time that it came in when we were in school, it did have a lot of fights. You know what I'm saying? And it was just kids being kids. It wasn't gang related. It wasn't.
Right.
I mean, we had a few rides when we was at Hummer Junior High before we got to Terrebonne, but it wasn't us. That happened. We really didn't get down to the bottom of why those things happen. But once it starts, is it parented? Is it actually policed the same? One kid may be in class talking a lot and get sent to the office. May make a comment like, man, you get on my nerves. And now it's even worse, comment in the write-up section. Are the kids being treated the same all the way around the board? For instance, my son got into a fight. And I never saw my son fight. And I'm not one of the people to say, well, my son wouldn't do this or whatever, So he got into a fight. I don't even think he landed a lick, to be honest with you. But when I was called to school, they was like, well, it was a gang fight and he's up for expulsion. And I'm like, what? A
Right.
gang fight?
Well, and I think that goes back to
We had that conversation with the
about words
terminology.
matter.
Right.
And
Gang
so,
or group fight?
That was
gang.
that was one of the. They told him gang, but the proper terminology is group.
Right.
Right.
And this is coming from the principal.
Right.
So of course you gotta send the kid to some type of counseling to see if he's all right or if he's going to be able to do this again or if he ever have to go. And then you got to go to court. So I'm thinking when I was in school, I got in a fight. If paddling was still going on, I caught a paddle. If not, I was suspended for 3 days. Now you automatically going home and you got to go sit in front of a judge.
Well, and I will say this: having the SRO on campus it is kind of a, I don't want to say a double-edged sword, but it's kind of, I guess, the best terminology I can come up with, because you do have schools in a parish that don't have them, right? So if you have a fistic encounter at, let's say, a middle school that doesn't have an SRO, those principals are more inclined to handle that matter as a school matter, right? They're more inclined to say this is just two boys got into a verbal dispute, in PE over a basketball.
And
game.
shouldn't it be that way?
What do you mean?
Like,
So-
shouldn't
It
isn't that part
should.
of the principal's job?
It is,
is
but
to-
the principal doesn't. Excuse me. The principal doesn't determine whether criminal charges are filed. And I will say this: for the most part, most SROs in our parish are very, very good at, if you have a push and match in PE between two boys, that they're not getting involved in that. Other than talking to them, trying to help them work through their problems, they're not getting involved in the criminality part of it. They'll let the school handle it, right? Most of the fighting that results in criminal charges being pressed is A, group fighting, or B, if they're in the middle of a classroom causing a big disturbance, the middle of lunch recess causing a big disturbance. Those things, your hands are kind of tied, right?
Whose hands are tied?
The law enforcement officers' hands
Okay.
are kind of tied, right? Because you can't just let those kind of things go on the campus, because without enforcement in a lot of those cases, then you have chaos, and you can't let it get to that point.
But I think those sorts of blanket consequences, have shown time and time again to disproportionately affect black and brown people. And kind of one example of that is like this tobacco issue we have right now with all these vapes, right?
That affects white kids more than anything else.
Potentially. I'm just well. Let me say where I'm going. Right.
I don't think I might have to call in for work, man. I'm on his side.
So when I say it affects them disproportionately, what I'm saying is, you've got these poor black and brown families that once you catch them with a vape or fighting in school, right, they have to go to court and they have to pay these court costs. And
so they should be treated like the white kids?
No.
Let them finish, sir.
And what I'm saying with that is, say $100 court fee is going to affect, a poor family's a poor family's situation more than it is going to affect even, middle or upper class family. And I guess,
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that with the zero tolerance thing, you've got this kind of blanket consequence where everybody gets it, right? The same argument goes with like speeding tickets, right? $200 speeding ticket for a poor family is going to absolutely destroy their monthly budget. Where you've got these, affluent kids that, $200 speeding ticket just be like, oh, Dad's going to pay that. I'm going to drive however I want, anyways. That's kind of what I'm getting at, and I think that's the biggest criticism of this zero tolerance thing. Is just everybody's treated the same in the eyes of the law, which is how it should be. But at the same time, some sort of discretion has to be given to what it's going to do to their family lives.
But we can't. I think where we're confusing things is you're confusing law enforcement and judicial. All right. Once a person is criminally charged, the law enforcement side of it is done.
Right.
Right. And look, I'm
courts impose fines, not enforce.
Right.
So I get that argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's again that could be a whole separate conversation. But I want to tail back to what you said about fighting in the classroom or things on campus, and your hands are tied when it comes to charging. We were talking about middle school kids.
I'm talking about in the high school. I'm talking about the
even
schools
high school
that have an SRO.
Because nowadays your ninth graders are in high school, and
right.
so and I know you say that, and you've said this in the past on one of our other podcasts that these write-ups and this documentation of what happens in school doesn't follow them. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does.
So they get in 3 fights in high school as ninth grade
juveniles. It doesn't matter if they get in a fight at school or a fight at the park.
I get it,
it's the same.
but it follows them in their brain, and that right. It's like saying, I got 10 tickets. Well, you didn't get a ticket. You got a warning. But in your brain, that damn cop wrote me a ticket. Whether it was a.
But you still have to have some self-accountability.
I don't disagree with that. But what I'm getting at is that when you said your hands are tied and you once said you spoke on discretion, and then on the other hand you said that your hands are tied, and I guess that's where my moral compass comes in and says, well, you can't either.
You have a lot more discretion with a small, isolated disturbance than you have with a large group fight.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad that's. Well, you said it when I first got it was when you were talking about a fight in a classroom. I took that as still a single. I understand a group fight, gang fight, any large, at recess when you have 30 kids that get in a brawl,
right.
Whether it be a huge pushing match, an argument between two parties, or I get that because you have to. It's all lumped up. I get that.
You still have a little less discretion with two kids get into an all-out brawl in the middle of the classroom that's put up on social media, and they're fighting in the middle of the classroom. They're rolling around, and desks are flying, teachers are getting hit, that they're hollering, cussing. There's chaos in the middle of the classroom, and you don't hold those kids accountable for getting into a fight. But then you're going to hold somebody else's kids accountable for getting into a fight. You see where you start getting.
I do, and that's why I think it's a very thin line to walk, and it's a very hard thing to do. But the long-term consequences of.
But what's the long-term consequences of not ever enforcing?
I'm not saying not enforcing it. I'm saying not creating.
In the middle of Walmart, get into a fist fight, but that's going to happen to you because that happened to you in high school. There's pros and cons to both of it.
But not for a single incident.
So
if somebody gets in multiple fights and or even a second fight, what I'm saying is that I'll use you as an example, right? You as a sophomore in high school, and somebody's constantly just on you, right? Whether it's bullying, teasing, talking about your mom or your sister, and it's just going on for long periods of time. and you can't. Dude walks by you, trip him, start beating the shit out of him, and you're like, you know what? And you're angry, you're upset, and it's a one-time incident, but it was bad, right? And
But there's things in place
and this
for that.
goes against you, and you have this, and you as the officers, I have no discretion in this, and then now everybody, especially in high school, you carry that stigma around that, you were arrested, you were this, you were that. Man, that changes you as a kid going over those next 2 years.
I don't know what the answer is to that, Jared.
There is no answer, man.
Yeah.
It's just the thing that we try to grow throughout the years, because I really felt like we were punished down here for the Columbine deal.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? We went to uniforms and everything, and we didn't even have that type of violence going on in our schools. Two with that situation is that once we started making charges for kids in schools, we started empowering the weak, if it makes sense. Like that lady that told me my son was in a gang fight, Cody, I sat there and asked her maybe 10 questions to the point where she was fumbling over her paperwork, had to call the school board to find out this information. Like she didn't know anything, but she was so quick to make that assumption and require these things for.
But Tori, that's also where
Go ahead. You talked about 4 times in this, and I only got 5.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was trying to just give advice on that. But go ahead, and I'll come in after.
But I mean, this the whole point of it. But with the zero tolerance, and like he's saying, that being in the place, it only takes for that to happen, and it only takes for either my son to be the son of a single parent. I could have been gone, his mom could have been gone, and us not to be in tune with them. To this situation could have went a whole lot different, if you see what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
So back in the day when we didn't have zero tolerance, if I got into a fight, guess what's going to happen? Mr. Turner or somebody's going to pull us in the office. They're going to call our parents. We're going to talk about it then, versus you coming down, having to talk to a cop,